Today I'm going to talk to you about some really great work that's happening across government in a number of communities, including the electronic records management community. So my name is Robert Wuhrman. I come from the Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA, and within that office I work in an office that's known as the Office of Shared Solutions and Performance Improvement. And our mission is to be really interested and work deliberately with the agency community, with OMB, with industry, in understanding where the opportunities are and where are the levers that can improve performance in the areas that are common among the agencies. So these are things that you could have certainly imagined, things like federal financial management and the life cycle of managing the funding and planning for how it's going to be used and reporting and accounting for it and everything that comes with that. Of course, this also includes human capital life cycle. So all the things that happen in HR and the importance that it is to the agencies to be able to acquire and recruit and develop and manage the performance of a high-caliber federal workforce in the execution of its mission. As well, we know procurement is something that's also very common to the agency community. So the ability of agencies to get access to the innovations that industry brings to the table, the ability to scale up when agencies need to in times where they need more capacity than they might typically have in a particular area. The ability to manage the travel life cycle when we need to go from point A to point B as a part of our work. Management of grants. So 22 of the CFO Act agencies have some aspect of grants management associated with their mission support life cycle. And this, of course, also includes the records management life cycle. In particular, we're also interested in the electronic records management life cycle. And cybersecurity is another one as well. And so we see these two as things that plug in across that, what we call that mission support life cycle. And so our office does not present itself necessarily as a subject matter expert in any one of these particular disciplines, but we work with leaders in government and with the agencies and OMB in industry to look for where the opportunities are to present things that can help the agencies improve their performance in these areas, whether it's consolidated ways of buying services and solutions, whether it's some type of a shared service that agencies would be able to plug into in all of these different ways, and whether it's policy that might help to move the needle and move the ball forward in any one of these areas. And the thing that interests us very much as part of this is the understanding that there is a mutual reliance across the mission support lifecycle. These functional areas, as we call them, finance and HR, records management, acquisition, they're all in many ways interconnected with one another. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And as a part of our work, we work closely with OMB and the agency community and the CXO councils earlier this year, and OMB issued a policy, M1916, related to centralizing mission support services. And there's a number of really interesting strategies that are baked into that memo, one of which I'm going to dive into that will set some context for later in the day when NARA comes to talk about how they're working on this particular strategy. And so the memo M1916 has three strategies, the first of which is understanding what are the things that we can actually share. And I'll get back to that in a quick second. The second of these is understanding, the strategy two is understanding what types of solutions can be put forward that would be beneficial to the agency community. Whether these are these centralized services that can be plugged into, whether there are consolidated buys that can leverage the economy of scale that the agency community brings to the table to help you get better value and cost savings in the solutions that you're implementing. And then strategy three is recognizing that there are already a number of services that are available out there, and let's just do a better job as a government in plugging into those and not necessarily trying to recreate them on our own. Things like purchase cards, things like fleet, for example, things like electronic invoicing. So what I want to talk about today, though, is that first strategy. So the first strategy speaks to understanding what it is that we can share, and a key component to that is the establishment of what it is that we actually do, getting a common understanding of what are the government-wide business standards for any one and all of these functional areas. So the private sector itself has made quite a few strides over the past few decades in implementing shared solutions to be able to implement these types of functions, but one of the things that they've seen that is a key to being successful is getting that first strategy in place to begin with. It's really hard to do strategy 2 well if you haven't figured out your strategy 1 in terms of what is it that we actually do in financial management or human capital, and being able to articulate that in a way that we can all agree as these solutions are put forward, and understanding what is it that as an agency I may want to be retaining in terms of the life cycle to do myself, and what is it that I would want to plug into some sort of a centralized capability. And that story may look slightly different from one agency to the next. One agency may want to plug more of its financial management capabilities into something that's centralized than another. And so one of the things that we have to support this strategy is a framework. So when we start to think about how a community would articulate what it is that is its business standards, and do know that the idea of communities developing standards is nothing new. This has been going on for many years, but one of the things that is new over the past few years and is baked into this memo that I spoke of earlier, M1916, is the idea of using a common framework to do this, because of that recognition once and for all that there is a mutual reliance across each of these communities. There are things that happen in acquisition that need to talk to things that happen in the financial management life cycle, things in payroll that talk to financial management. As you could imagine, as records management, I could certainly see that plugging into any one or all of these functional areas. So as a community develops its standards, unlike in the past where that's often been done in a siloed fashion without acknowledgement that there may be other functional areas that things need to plug into, what we have now is what we call the Federal Integrated Business Framework. So it's a framework, and I'm going to just very briefly talk about each of these. And the important thing that I would hope that you take away today from my presentation is the understanding that this really great work that's happening, understand the context of the records management business standards that are being developed and how that also can relate to what's happening in all of these other areas. We heard earlier that NARA has identified a number of areas in terms of its records management policy related to HR and finance. So know that there are business standards that are likewise being developed in each of those areas that are using the same framework that the records management community is using. And so we call this the FIBF, and it essentially is composed of 5 dimensions. And you see this here on what we call the FIB F Wheel. And it's really all of the types of things that one might want to speak to if you were developing requirements. Right? So if you're thinking about developing requirements for some type of a solution, this framework is something that's been put forward and is being used by communities to do that. And so the first element of it, and you go around this wheel in a clockwise fashion from one slice of the pie to the next. But the first is that federal business life cycle. What are the key high-level functions and activities that are part of the work that I do as a records manager or as a financial analyst or as an HR person? And so things in the records management life cycle such as capture, dispose, maintenance and use, and transfer. So these are high-level functions that themselves have activities associated with them. So that's the first step in building this out. And if you're familiar with the Fermi project, which you'll hear more about later today, that's exactly this. And so it's using this framework that's intended to be able to plug into these other areas. And so the second piece of that puzzle is to take the functions and activities from the top and to create a set of outcome-based business capabilities. And one of the great things about that is that those business capabilities include inputs and outputs that later on help you to establish your data standards. And those same inputs and outputs of the business capabilities are able to be used in the third piece of the puzzle to create use cases, which is essentially your end-to-end process that creates the story of something that might happen as of managing a record through the life cycle and how you may need to connect into things that happen in the HR life cycle as you do that. So the other element, as I had mentioned, with the inputs and outputs of the business capabilities is the ability to create an end-to-end process that doesn't just reside within records management. So this is what's different. This is one of the key things that's different than what we've seen in the past with standards works. If you have an end-to-end process that includes finance and acquisition, and there's inputs and outputs associated with the capabilities that are connecting with each other, likewise, having business capabilities around records management helps you to complete that full life cycle that you need in order to manage the records that are a part of that work. So the fourth piece of the puzzle, and I mentioned it earlier, is the idea of coming up with the data standards. What are the standard data elements that are a part of the work that we do in each of these functional areas? Really important in being able to facilitate interoperability between these solutions, really important in being able to start to have performance-based discussions as well, and understanding are we able to consistently measure how timely we are and the level of quality we are executing in each of these areas. So having that agreement on what the data standards are and being able to have discussions around performance is really key, which leads us, of course, to performance metrics. So what does success look like in each of these functional areas? And that's also a really key piece when we start to think about using the business standards to engage with industry for some type of a solution. So what does success look like when we have vendor partners that are supporting us in implementing on records management or in putting forward solutions that will help with the human capital life cycle, in talent development, or in recruiting or performance management? So this is sort of the high level of the FIBF. As you hear a little bit later today about FIRMI, understand that this is that framework. And really the three key things that are part of this is, number one, to understand its cross-functional nature and the fact that we do have this mutual reliance on one another in providing support to the mission. The second piece of this is to also know that it's intended to not necessarily get to the 100% requirement of everything that everybody needs within each of your agencies to be able to do records management or financial management. There is the understanding that some agencies do have differences. We do believe we are more alike than we are different as an agency community, but the great thing about the FIBF is it leaves that space open for understanding that there may be an authoritative reason why an agency needs to do something that's a little bit different. So the FIBF is intended to get to that 60, 70, 80, 90% baseline of what it is that a community may need to be able to do and what it is that they agree is a part of their work. So that doesn't need to be recreated on an agency-by-agency basis, but instead put forward as a common baseline that serves as a starting point. And then the third piece of this is the authoritative nature of the FIBF. So the things that go into the standards, and if you've been a part of one of these working groups and developing them, is to understand that it needs to appeal to some authoritative reference. So whether that's policy, whether that's regulation or statute, the things that we have to do being driven and traceable to some authoritative reason. So those are really three key things about this FIBF. And one of the things that I will note, I had previously worked for 6 years at one of the agencies, and one of the things that we were tasked with in our office at one point was to implement records management. And it was about 10 years ago. And it was interesting because the edict came down, thou shalt implement records management. And we began to have meetings to start planning how we were going to do this. We had seen policy memos on this, and we understood that this was a thing that needed to be done. But every time we gathered in one of these meetings, it was quite interesting. The subject of discussion would repeatedly devolve into discussing backup tapes. We always ended up discussing backup tapes as though that was the end state of being successful with records management. And it was such a challenge. And part of that, what contributed to that, was the idea that we could see there were a stack of policies on the need to do records management. And we had a records management who had joined us in the agency, but being able to bridge the gap between the policy and understanding what the actual life cycle of managing records looks like, and to be able to articulate that among the folks in the IT shop and in the program areas and to the executives above and beyond what you find in a policy is something that we didn't have. And it's what I think is one of the reasons why we sort of had this Groundhog Day type of a scenario where every time we would meet, we'd get into this sort of head-banging situation of talking about how we're going to manage backup tapes. And so one of the great things that I see in retrospect 10 years later is with the FIBF, it does create that bridge. We have that bridge between what you might find in a stack of policies that records managers very well understand and what it is that you need to articulate to the program areas in the business and IT around what the records management lifecycle actually looks like as we start to get together and figure out how to put these solutions forward. So at the end of the day, as I had mentioned, it's this integrated nature, something much different than what we've seen in the establishment of business standards in each of these areas is the understanding that we do have this mutual reliance on what we do, and we all sort of have equal skin in the game when it comes to being successful with this. And so let's establish a set of standards, even if it serves as our 70, 80, 90% starting point for what we need to get things going, that can also connect across the entire mission support lifecycle. So one of the ways that this is used, and then I'll just close up, is because our office is also very interested in helping agencies understand what tools there might be out there to be more successful. So we do have a modernization playbook as well. And part of that modernization playbook leverages how to bring the standards to the table when you're planning some type of an upgrade or a modernization or transformation of capabilities in your agency. And so there's 6 steps here in the modernization playbook, and they bridge a number of different work streams, including the technologies that you need to be considerate of, including the business processes, including the workforce, and including the program management. So the great thing about this playbook is there are 80 activities in there, and those 80 activities speak to what types of roles need to be at the table when you're having discussions across each of these work streams. What are the inputs and outputs as you're planning this out? So do know that in addition to things like standards and the work that we're doing with these communities, that there are other tools out there as you start to think about how it is you can be successful in meeting your records management needs. So with that being said, I did want to provide some information. If you would like to follow up with us, or if you'd like to on your own learn more, the FIBF is on our website at ussm.gsa.gov, and certainly feel free to email us, and we'd love to work with you and help you out more.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think we have time for 1 or 2 very quick questions. Yes.
Yes.
Do we see it? Sorry, I saw a hand, and that was someone taking a photo.
Hi, Eyal Blumstein from Zimmerman again. So the FIBF is a set of standards or a set of policies or guidelines of how to implement the effective program. And you spoke about tools. Is there a specific technology, or is there a specific tool, or is it technology agnostic and it can be implemented on multiple tools? Sure. Either way, have you implemented it somewhere, and what are your impression so far?
Sure, that's a great question. So another great way that the FIBF is used is in the planning and implementation of an actual solution. And to your point about technology, the story of what the right technology would be may vary from one functional area to another. I will say that the lean and interest is to, as much as we reasonably can, look to industry-based solutions, particularly on the things that are common to the agencies when we speak about mission support with finance, HR, and so forth. So one example of where the FIBF is being used is within the new pay acquisition. So the new pay project, if you haven't heard of that, it's a project to essentially push the reset button on how federal payroll is done in terms of what are the technologies that are used to do that. So leveraging commercial software as a service in the cloud to do federal payroll. And so that's the new pay BPA. It's a $2.5 billion BPA. There's a couple of vendors that were awarded that last September of 2018. And so there's a project underway now to work with the federal payroll providers in understanding how to best take advantage of that. So that BPA actually used the FIBF as its requirements. So the business capabilities that were in the BPA were used to evaluate the vendors that submitted proposals. There's also, with the use cases serve as a tool to ask a vendor to demonstrate how their technology can meet the life cycle requirements of the federal government when it comes to records management or finance and so forth. So that's one of the great ways that the FIBF is used. Hope that answers your question. Thank you, sir.
I think I think we need to leave it there for now.